So this is going to sound a bit weird, but remember last time when I mentioned my issue with episodes that suffer from having very basic plots? Well, I may have to rethink my real issue with those episodes, because Pinkie Apple Pie also has a pretty basic plot. Pinkie goes on a road trip with Applejack and her family to find out if she's related to them. And that's it. Yet, I thought this episode was really good. It does so little and yet says so much about the characters of Pinkie Pie and Applejack, what being a family is really about, how Applejack views her family, and how important being or not being related by blood really is. My immediate thoughts after watching this episode was, wow, I can't wait to see Digi break this one down, and it's an Applejack episode, so this is right up his alley. Then the video ended up being less than 2 minutes. Really? Is that all you had to say? Well, I guess that means I can take the reins. It's quite interesting that this is already the second Applejack episode this season, and both have had her sharing the limelight with some pony else. Evidently the writers are starting to understand that she can't really carry an episode on her own. I also find it odd that in a story where Pinkie is excited about being a member of another family, her actual family is never mentioned. This makes me wonder just how much Pinkie values her family. We saw in the Cutie Mark Chronicles that they are really not like her at all, so it might make sense to assume that Pinkie wants to distance herself from them as much as possible, and the idea that she is related to a much more upbeat and likeable family would naturally excite her. But what throws a bit of a spanner in the works of this whole thing is that in the book Pinkie Pie and the Rocking Ponypalooza Party, Pinkie is seen to have far more love and admiration for her family than you would have expected given how unlike her they are. Based on that evidence, you'd think she might have at least mentioned them to Applejack. It might have been a nice thing to have expanded on in this episode. However, it's debatable if that book is even canon, so I don't think we can really hold that against the episode. We also get to see a real insight into the Apple family as a unit, something Apple Family Reunion should have done, as we see more of Applejack's leadership skills as well as how the rest of the family deal with this. Admittedly, we did see a little bit of this in Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000, but that was more of her leading the business of making cider, while here it's her leading them purely as a family. Family stories have always fascinated me. It's one of the main reasons why I love films like The Incredibles, and Sisterhood Social is my favourite episode of this show, because family dynamic is so much different than most of the other types of dynamics this show uses, making it a little difficult to figure out what kind of relationship they have. With friends, if you fall out with them, you can just choose not to be friends with them anymore. But with family, you have more of an obligation to get along with them, because they will always be your family and they are always going to be there. There is always the potential for some real good character development and great dialogue if these types of stories are done well. And the scene where they are getting ready to start the family road trip really shows a well done family dynamic. Even with Big Macintosh's limited vocabulary, we see that kind of mistrust between him and Applejack. Applejack wants to trust that Big Mac knows what he's doing, but also doesn't want to offend him by saying that she doesn't think that the wagon can take all this stuff, as well as start an argument in front of Pinkie. Moving along, we get a song in our third straight episode. The first thing I noticed is Applejack's lead-in line, which kind of implies that they can actually hear the instrumental to the song. Where is it coming from? Does that wagon have a stereo? It also implies that this is some kind of family anthem that they sing regularly. There is some family spirit for you. This is certainly my favourite song of the season so far. A really nice upbeat tune with some pretty clever lyrics. Looks like Big Mac packed everything including the kitchen sink. I also like the way that each of them get a verse on their own. Except Big Mac, of course, but hey, just having him sing at all is awesome enough. A nice final touch was the way Pinkie doesn't join in until the last verse. By the way, is that pink? It looks more purple. It sort of symbolises her joining as the new member of the family. When the wagon collapses, we see Applejack being understandably annoyed at Big Mac for having overloaded the wagon, but she doesn't want Pinkie to get a bad impression of the family. Applejack genuinely seems to think that being a good family is about never arguing or blaming others when things have gone wrong, even when that blame is justified. But in fact, arguing is just part of being a family, as well as being friends. Because however close you are with someone, you are inevitably going to fall out with them at some point. What gives any type of relationship strength is how you deal with those disagreements and how close you stay afterwards. Suppose you had a friend that, for whatever reason, you just never had an argument with in all the time you'd known them, and then suddenly it happened. It would be uncommon ground for the two of you, so you probably wouldn't know what to do, and it could ultimately bring an end to your friendship. I love the indication that Big Mac is actually a lot smarter than he seems on the surface. Maybe he's a really quiet guy because he spends all his time thinking. I also thought the Twilight Licious reference was very clever, and also so subtle that I didn't even notice it the first time I watched the episode. I also love the writing of Pinkie Pie in this episode, with her remaining positive about absolutely everything that happens, however awful the situation might be. The excitement she has as they approach the scary cave was just classic Pinkie. It's probably the most in character she's been written this season. You know, as disappointing as it is that M.A. Larson and Cindy Morrow are no longer writing for this show, I'm really liking the new writers they brought in this season. They really seem to understand the characters. The only gripe I have with this scene is that I would have liked to have actually seen the scary stuff in the tunnel. I'm always excited to see scary stuff in animation, where there is really no limit to what you can create, so not seeing anything was just disappointing for me personally. The next sequence with the family arguing wasn't as interesting to me. It felt like it was nothing but them just going back over the issues they had already argued about, while Pinkie continued to remain positive. Also, realising at the last second that you're about to go down a waterfall is awfully cliched. By the way, how is Pinkie taking these photos if she's in them? The scene when they arrive at Golden Delicious' house spoke volumes to me about the episode. Pinkie remains positive even about the fact that she's not home, and yet the apples are still rather downbeat about the experience, feeling that they have let Pinkie down by failing to get along. They even start to believe that, due to this failure, she will not want to consider herself a member of the family. So apparently they were blind to Pinkie's constant positive attitude throughout the trip. That is kind of the natural reaction when you feel you are being judged. You tend to only focus on the negative. But of course, Pinkie is able to help them see what everyone else can see. Everyone else but them. Did I just quote One Direction? There are a lot of subtle indications that Golden Delicious is related to Pinkie. Firstly, she greets them by returning Pinkie's hello and adding yourself, a similar response to the one Pinkie gave Twilight at the start of the episode when she screamed. She owns a lot of cats, which could make her a crazy cat lady, something Pinkie feared Rarity would become in Suited for Success. She has similar curly hair to Pinkie and similar odd traits about her, such as eating a gingerbread house for lunch and hoarding a lot of random items. Finally, and the most obvious hint of all, the way she removes a book from the bottom of the pile, similar to what Pinkie did with the pile of scrolls in Twilight's house. What's interesting is that Golden Delicious' house looks to be in such a mess that it does seem to suggest that she's a bit of a wash-up who doesn't know what she's doing in life. Is this perhaps an implication that this is what Pinkie will end up like if she's not careful? I have a feeling we might see this character again sometime. I assumed the first time I saw this episode that we're going to find out Pinkie wasn't related to them, and then Applejack would say that it didn't actually matter if they're related by blood or not. Emotionally speaking, they have always been a family. But the way they leave it ambiguous makes me wonder if this is something else that might come back later, such as being the increase in continuity this season. The last scene where Pinkie becomes excited about being part of a family argument also seems to suggest that she's never experienced anything like this with her actual family. I am now a lot more interested in her upbringing. Overall, I was really impressed by how much this episode said about the characters without actually needing much of a story. Family stories are always just a lot of fun to watch, just to see the close but also tense relationships that family members have with each other. It gave me what I wished Apple Family Reunion had done. My only major issues would be that they didn't attempt to develop Big Mac and Granny Smith a bit more, and that we didn't get to see inside that scary tunnel. But otherwise, I just love how thought-provoking this episode is.
We've traveled the road of generations, joined by a common bond. We sing our song across the Pony Nation from Equestria